Looking back, I can see all those happy memories didn't happen by chance. I wish I knew then what I know now. I should have asked more questions, got more advice. I didn't realise how much you sacrificed. Now I'm a parent, I see everything you did for me. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone to our Secrets of Prophecy seminar and to our second session. And our subject today is a big one: who will control the world? And there have been plenty of people who have wanted to control the world, and perhaps the most notable person, one of the most notable persons in history who wanted to control the world has been Adolf Hitler. He predicted that a united Europe would take place, and he would establish a 1,000-year world domination. He said, "See, my people, we do not need anything from God, and we don't ask anything from him, except that he may let us alone. We want to fight our own war with our own guns without God. We want to gain our victory without the help of God." This is what he is reported to have said back in March of 1941. Now, the Bible foretold, of course, the doom of Hitler and any other individual who have sought to control the world, especially the old world in Europe. And it foretold that in the biblical book of Daniel, and what a mighty prophet Daniel is. So we're going to enjoy getting into one of his most tremendous subjects, one of his most tremendous prophecies, the prophecy in Daniel, the second chapter. Now, I'm generally the last person who's told about a good book to read, but this is a very good book to read, let me tell you. It's called 1,000 Shall Fall, and it's the story of Franz Hasel. He was a Christian pacifist, and he was drafted into the German army in 1940. He was assigned to Pioneer Company 699, and all but 7 of his 1,200 man unit died in the cold of Russia in the Second World War. They were sent to the Russian front, and 2.7 million German soldiers died in the Russian front. But Franz Hasel and 6 others lived. How did he live? How did he survive when all of his entire company perished in that war? Well, Franz Hasel was baptized a Christian in 1921, and he believed the prophecies of the Bible. His commanding officer once asked him if he thought that Hitler would win the war. And there was a kind of unwritten rule that if the commanding officer would take off his hat, it meant that they could just speak as man to man. And so Franz said, "Is this an official question? Or are you just asking me this question?" And so his officer took off his hat, and so he knew that he could talk freely. And so he took out of his coat his Daniel 2 card. He had a little Bible prophecy, Bible study that he carried around in his pocket in the wall, and this is it here during the war. He answered by using this Daniel 2 card, and he began to teach his commanding officer that according to Bible prophecy, in particular the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2, that Hitler would not win the war. And he went through history and explained the prophecy, as we are going to do in this session. Now, because his commanding officer liked Franz Hasel and trusted him, he didn't tell Franz Hasel this, but what he did as they went into Russia, his commanding officer stockpiled fuel and supplies because he knew that they would fail in Russia according to that prophecy of Daniel 2 and that Hitler would not win the war. And so he knew he would have to make a return journey. Well, I tell you what, a correct understanding of Bible prophecy can even save your life. You ought to get hold of that book, 1,000 Shall Fall, and read it. It'll be a blessing to you. Now, Daniel's secrets of prophecy, they were written from ancient Babylon in what is called modern Iraq today. This is the land between the rivers Euphrates and Tigris. or it's called Mesopotamia by the Greeks. And Daniel was sent here in exile during the Babylonian captivity of the Jews. Now, Babylon is about 80 kilometres south of Baghdad, down there in the south of Iraq. And it was the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey who excavated Babylon in the years prior to the war. And only because of the war, the First World War, was the excavation stopped. Now, most of what he discovered, he discovered the famous Ishtar Gate, which was the main entrance into Babylon, and it was covered with beautiful blue glazed tiles. And he just brought them all back. He collected all these things that he found, and he brought them all back to Germany, and they reconstructed a portion of this famous entrance gate through which Nebuchadnezzar would have walked, and Daniel the prophet as a prisoner would have walked, and they brought it back, catalogued all the tiles, and they reconstructed the gate. And here it is. I went to visit it some years back. The reconstructed gate in the museum here is 14 metres high, but the original was over 23 metres high and beautifully designed with a beautiful blue glazed tile and illustrated with mythological beasts and animals and soldiers and so forth. This is a model of what the famous Ishtar Gate would have looked like. And the Ishtar Gate led to the famous main street of Babylon called the Processional Way. And this is the Processional Way more or less today. Saddam Hussein, during his power, his reign, he reconstructed some of the walls of Babylon, but this is the original Processional Way. These paving stones are the very stones that King Nebuchadnezzar, the famous king of the 6th century BC, would have walked, where Daniel the prophet and other prisoners of war would have walked, where Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia, would have walked, where Alexander the Great, the king of Greece, came and walked. Along the processional way were walls on either side, and they were decorated by lions, 120 of them, 60 on each side, because lions were a symbol of power and strength. Nebuchadnezzar was a great builder, and we're told he built many, many temples, 53 temples, 300 smaller chapels, hundreds of altars and shrines to Ishtar and the Babylonian god Marduk. In Babylon also was the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon. You see, Nebuchadnezzar married a Median princess from Iran today, and this was in the hills. There were hills, or there are hills. I've been there in Iran to Media. And this lady was used to, beautiful green trees and so on. Well, down there in Babylon, in Iraq, it's a desert. You've got the Euphrates running through, but basically it's a flat plain desert. And so in order to please his wife, he built an artificial mountain. He had a tremendous irrigation system, watering system, and he planted trees and shrubs and so forth so that his wife could walk in the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and feel like she was in the hills of her home country. That's a very good husband, don't you think? Doing that for his wife. Well, the Tower of Babel was also in Iraq, and it's mentioned in Genesis, the 11th chapter. They called this tower Etemenanke, which meant the foundation of heaven and earth. This tower in Babylon was in a state of disrepair during the time of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC, and Alexander was going to make Babylon the capital of a vast Greek empire. And he wanted to rebuild this tower, but so it was in such a state of disrepair, he had the site cleared, and unfortunately he died before rebuilding could start. But this is shows the footprint of where the Tower of Babel perhaps was. Also in Babylon today, you have this palace here that overlooks the ruins of one of Nebuchadnezzar's palaces. And this is the palace of Saddam Hussein. He built an artificial mountain, and he built his palace higher than the palace of Nebuchadnezzar because Saddam idolized Nebuchadnezzar and he wanted to become the new Nebuchadnezzar of the modern world. And why wouldn't he? I mean, Nebuchadnezzar conquered the Jewish nation 3 times, and so Saddam thought he would be the next conqueror. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, the Americans were flying all over Babylon and Iraq, of course, And of course, many of these fellows were brought up in Sunday school, and they learned the stories of Daniel and the lion's den and the stories of Daniel in Babylon. And so they were taking pictures out of the windows of these helicopter gunships down over the ruins of Babylon. In this picture, you've got Saddam's palace, and you can see the Euphrates River there behind it. Here you have part of the processional way, and looking down where some people are, you have the Lion of Babylon. Here are some of the ruins of Babylon, and in the background, some of the reconstruction by Saddam Hussein. He was actually going to put a monorail through here and make it a bit of a Disneyland kind of thing for tourists, but of course that never happened. Unfortunately, he did build over an archaeological site, destroying much of the antiquity in his rebuilding. Here's the Lion of Babylon, and as we go down to have a look, there it is. It's a picture of a sculpture of a lion crouching over the fallen figure of a man. And of course, lions were the symbol of power and strength. And to every visitor to Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar was basically saying that when it comes to power in the Middle East, he is the king of the jungle. And so he used the lion as an emblem, a symbol of his power and strength and might. In 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar invaded Jerusalem. You see, there's Babylon on the map, showing Iraq on the Euphrates River. And it was in 612 BC that young Prince Nebuchadnezzar with his father Nabopolassar went up, and they fought against the previous reigning kingdom, which was the Assyrian Empire. And their base was up at Nineveh on the Tigris in the north of Iraq. They defeated the Assyrians in 612 BC. And of course, this put a power vacuum in the Middle East. And so the Egyptians from the south, they marched up through Palestine, and they fought the Babylonians for the right to rule at a famous battle at Carchemish in 605 BC. The Babylonians, under young Prince Nebuchadnezzar, won that battle, and then he chased the Egyptians all the way back. Unfortunately, Jerusalem had allied themselves with the Egyptians at the time, and this was not good news for them, because now Babylon, under young Prince Nebuchadnezzar, and the armies of Babylon came, and they laid siege to Jerusalem, and they took away captives. And among these captives was young Daniel. While Nebuchadnezzar was laying siege to Jerusalem, he got news that his father, Nabopolassar, had died back at home in Babylon. And so Nebuchadnezzar raced across the desert back to Babylon to secure his place on the throne. Meanwhile, the captives and the prisoners of war, among whom was young Daniel the prophet, was taken around what's called the Fertile Crescent to Babylon. And this began what is called the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, the 70-year captivity of the Jews that took place from 606 or 605 down to 538, 537 BC. Now, Daniel was a Jewish prisoner of war in Babylon, just a young man in his late teens as he was taken prisoner there. Daniel the prophet today, of course, is revered by the three great monotheistic religions in the world, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And it's Daniel that wrote an amazing prophecy of world history. Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 43 years. And it was in the second year of his reign, in 603 or 602 BC, that Nebuchadnezzar had this strange dream that is recorded in the second chapter of the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel was later given the same dream, and he was also given its interpretation that showed him who would control the world right up until our day, the great world leaders from the Middle East and Europe and so forth. Now, will it be the United States, do you think, that will control the world? Will it be Israel? Well, China's making a play for world domination. Will it be a religious leader, such as the Pope? Or a new power, such as the United States of Europe? Will one of the nations of Islam begin to dominate the new world? Who's going to come out on top in control of the world? Well, we need to go and at least take notice of this very important prophecy in Daniel. What happened to Nebuchadnezzar one night? Well, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled that his sleep left him. Now, it was a very impressive dream. So impressive, it woke him up. But when he woke up, unfortunately, he couldn't remember the dream. So he called in his wise men to come and help him. The king gave the command to call the magicians and the astrologers, the sorcerers and the Chaldeans, to tell the king his dreams. It was common practice for these wise men to interpret dreams for the king, part of their divination that they would use to interpret the future and predict the future. But the king couldn't remember the dream. So he told them, look, I want you not only to interpret the dream, you need to tell me what I dreamt, because I've forgotten it. So to the wise men of Babylon, the interpretation of a dream, that wasn't unusual or difficult. That is, of course, if the king told them what the dream was in the first place. But, the king couldn't remember. So the Chaldeans, they answered the king and they said, there's not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. I mean, you're asking us to tell you what you dreamt? How can we do that? Well, the king, of course, he thought, well, I'm paying you fellas. You're in touch with our Babylonian gods. Surely the gods can reveal to you what I dreamt. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm paying you so much money for. Now, as we look at this whole thing, these wise men were using astrology and divination and various other methods of interpretation. But these astrologers and wise men of Babylon could not answer the king's question in his day. And I would like to suggest to you the astrology even of today is just as useless in interpreting the future as it was in Nebuchadnezzar's day in the 6th century BC. Could the wise men reveal the secrets? And what was the result? Well, for this reason, the king was angry. He was furious. And he gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. He was going to kill them all. He had been paying them long enough, and now they seemed to be useless and could not answer the request of the king. So the command came to kill them. Now Daniel and his young friends that were with him, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, they were being groomed to become part of the wise men of Babylon. And so they were included in this death penalty. And this wasn't too happy for Daniel and his friends when they found out about it. So when Daniel heard about the situation, he asked the king a question. So Daniel went in and he asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Well, I guess the king gave him 24 hours and said, Daniel, well, fair enough. You've got some time. If you can come back and tell me tomorrow morning what I dreamt and what it means, then you can live. Otherwise, you're all going to die. Well, I'll tell you what, I would do what anyone else would do in a situation like that. I would start praying my head off. Well, Daniel asked for time and he got a bit of time. And Daniel went to his house, and he made the decision known to Hananiah, these are the Jewish names, Mishael and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret. And that's what Daniel did. They got on their knees and they began to pray to their God. And I like what this author says, one of my favourite Christian authors. She says, the greatest victories are those gained in the audience chamber with God, when earnest, agonizing faith lays hold upon the mighty arm of power. And that's just exactly what Daniel did. He got into his audience chamber with God. He was a man of prayer. He prayed 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. He lived in relationship with his God, and he sought God about this predicament. Lord, the king wants to know his dream and what it meant. And Lord, if you are the one who gave the king his dream, then I'm wondering, Lord, if you might give me the same dream. And also, Lord, the interpretation. If not, it doesn't matter. I'm ready to die for you anyway. Well, Daniel, after he prayed that prayer and agonized with God, he went to bed and he slept like a baby. He didn't worry all night like I would have about losing my life the next day. He slept like a baby because he trusted the God of heaven. And during the night, God indeed gave Daniel the same dream of Nebuchadnezzar and also the interpretation. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. While he slept, he dreamed the same dream. What did Daniel say about the God of heaven when he woke up and realized that God had answered his prayer? Well, he said he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and he sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. And he has power to reveal deep and secret things. And he knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. Daniel's God knew the future, and Daniel trusted his God to reveal to him the dream and also its interpretation. And the overall purpose of this whole dream, really, is to reveal this secret, that it is God, it is not human kings and human armies who control the destiny of this planet. God is behind all human activity. He rules over all human activity. And while he allows people to freely choose, God is ultimately in control, and we can trust a God who is in control. Do not execute, said Daniel. He went to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard. Don't execute these wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I'll interpret his dream for him. And so Daniel was brought in before the king, and he began to explain to King Nebuchadnezzar what he dreamt. He said to Nebuchadnezzar, first of all, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men and the astrologers, the magicians and the soothsayers, they can't do this. They can't declare this for the king. It's not possible for astrology and magicians and all these people in the black arts and so forth to reveal the future. But he said, there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. So if you want to find out about the future, may I give you a good suggestion? Don't go to the Women's Weekly magazine and look at the astrology columns at the back of those magazines or wherever. Don't look at all these other funny ideas or to the occult or anything else to find the future. Open the Bible, and with your prayer in your heart, God will reveal the future, because he has done so in the Bible. He has revealed enough to give us faith and to give us evidence for his existence and the power of his might. So let's continue. History is not a random kaleidoscope of events. History ultimately is, well, let me say, it's his story. History is in the hands of God. It inevitably unfolds according to his will. As for you, O king, said Daniel, thoughts came to your mind while you were on your bed about what would come to pass after this, and he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be, a revelation of the future. I wonder what this future is all about. So in 13 short verses, we now find 2,500 years of world history revealed with astounding accuracy. I'm always amazed at how God can fit so much into a few words. And now we're going to read it together and see how the future is indeed revealed in an amazing way. What did Daniel say the king saw in the dream? Well, he saw a great image. The king was used to idol worship. He worshipped images, and so God spoke to Nebuchadnezzar in the language he would understand. He gave him a dream of an image. And as Daniel began to explain and talk about this image, Nebuchadnezzar was beginning to remember what he had dreamed. There were certain metals that represented different kingdoms. It had a head of gold, this image. It had a chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, and legs of iron, and then its feet were made of iron and clay. And what did the stone do? He saw a stone that was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it came and it struck the image, and it destroyed all those metals and the whole entire image. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. And the stone that struck the image, it became a great mountain, and it filled the entire earth. This is the dream, said Daniel. Now we will tell the interpretation before the king. This is another thing I like about Bible prophecy. When God is given a vision or a dream that is obviously in symbolic language, like we have here in Daniel 2, an image with four metals, gold, silver, bronze, iron and clay, he then also provides the interpretation. We don't have to speculate what it represents. God tells us what it represents, and if we allow the Bible to interpret itself, we will never go wrong in understanding symbolic Bible prophecy as we find in Daniel and Revelation. What does the head of gold then represent? Notice how clearly it is explained by Daniel. You are this head of gold. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom, which was the Babylonian kingdom, is represented by the head of gold. So the head of gold, we now have a starting point of what this kingdom or metal represents. It represents the Babylonian kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. It was indeed a golden kingdom, the Babylonian kingdom, and it certainly had a golden future. It was a tremendous power in the Middle East, the ruling power in the Middle East in the 6th century BC under its most famous king, Nebuchadnezzar. He even had bricks stamped with his name all over it, and he said in one of the translations, the Babylon, the city which is the delight of my eyes, which I have glorified, may it last forever. He never wanted his beautiful city or his kingdom to ever end. But God knew better that it would end. The prophet Isaiah had a few predictions to say about Babylon as well. And notice this one from Isaiah 13, written in the 8th century before Christ. In Babylon, the glory of the kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And when this prediction was written, Babylon had not even reached the zenith of its power under King Nebuchadnezzar, which was in the 6th century BC. And Isaiah went on to say about the future of Babylon, it will never be inhabited, nor will it be settled from generation to generation, nor will the Arabian pitch tents there, nor will the shepherds even take their sheep there. It takes a bold man to make a statement like that. Here is the capital of a world empire, the Babylonian Empire. And the prophet Isaiah wrote more than a century beforehand that the future of that great capital, that great kingdom, Babylon, that it would be never inhabited again. Now, there are many ancient cities that are inhabited today. Jerusalem has been destroyed many times and is continually inhabited. Damascus is another old city, been destroyed but is still inhabited today. But not so Babylon. It's not inhabited today. Babylon, said Jeremiah, would become a heap of ruins, haunted by jackals, a land horrible to see, incredible, and without a living soul. These are the ruins of Babylon in the background here. And you might see to the right of the picture some ruins of Babylon, and that little cave there is a jackal's den. Literally. As the prophet said. There are heaps of ruins. That's what it's become today. Babylon is a heap of ruins, exactly as the prophet said. And we don't have to be a believer to accept these things, because a fact is a fact. And the fact is, Jeremiah and Isaiah got it right in the future predictions concerning Babylon. It's not inhabited today. No one lives there. And it's just a pile of ruins, except where Saddam has tried to reconstruct a few things. You shall be desolate forever, said Jeremiah, and so it is today. You know, as a mirror perfectly reflects the image, so does Babylon reflect the ancient predictions of the Bible. Just a heap of ruins, desolate. Even though it's not far from the Euphrates and there's water, it's a desolate ruin today. So Babylon, it ruled from the time of Nebuchadnezzar down to 539 BC. And then we're told in Daniel, after you, or after the Babylonian kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. So a new kingdom would come, represented by the chest and arms of silver. And this, of course, to anyone who knows anything about history, was the Medo-Persian Empire. From Iran, the Medes and the Persians that conquered the Babylonian kingdom in 539. And they ruled in the Middle East down to 331 BC. The Medes and the Persians, under their great king Cyrus the Great, defeated Babylon in 538. And this is the famous Cyrus cylinder. It's in the British Museum. It was found in Babylon in 1879, where Cyrus spoke of his conquering of the city of Babylon. Here's the partial translation. Marduk, which is the god of Babylon, looked through all the countries, searching for a righteous ruler. And he pronounced the name of Cyrus, king of Anshan or Persia, declared him to be ruler of all the world. He made him to set out on the road to Babylon, and without any battle he made him enter his town of Babylon, sparing Babylon any calamity. And what Cyrus is doing, he's basically saying, hey, your God, the Babylonian god Marduk, is the one who has allowed me to come and be the new ruler. So I guess he was trying to hope that people would not revolt in an uprising against him. But he mentions that he took Babylon without a battle. Now this is strange talk, because when an invading army comes against another army, there's generally a fight and bloodshed and destruction before a victor arises on top of the scene. But without a battle, he says, he took Babylon, sparing Babylon any calamity. Well, it was a Greek historian, Herodotus, in the 5th century BC, who actually described and recorded how Cyrus overthrew, without a battle, mind you, the city of Babylon. What he did was, because Babylon was surrounded by about 16 kilometres of tremendous city walls, and there was a moat and so forth, and they were double walls and very high, just about an impregnable fortress. But the river Euphrates went through the city of Babylon, kind of diagonally through the city, and there were tremendous river gates, iron river gates, over the river that they could protect the way into the heart of the city by the river. So what Cyrus did, he diverted the flow of the river Euphrates into an artificial lake. And this made the water level of the river as it went through Babylon to go down. And so his men were stationed as the river went into the city and as it came out of the city. And as the water level went down, his men were able to get in under those great iron river gates into the heart of the city. Now, of course, even if they got inside the city, they were still caught like rats in a trap, because there were still tremendous walls on either side of the river, on both sides inside the city. And so they would be, could be just shot down by archers or something like that. However, the prophet Isaiah, 150 years before, predicting the overthrow of the city of Babylon by Cyrus, said that the gates will not be shut, if you please. And just true to prophecy, that's what happened. The Babylonians were having a feast on that night. They were drunking and they were having a party. In fact, it's recorded in the Bible in Daniel 5. It's called the Feast of Belshazzar, or Belshazzar's Feast. And they left the gates open. So while they were partying, not caring about the invading army around them, they left the gates open, and Cyrus's men stole inside the city through the open river gates into the heart of the city. And while all the soldiers and they were partying, it's no problem fighting a drunk man, is it? That last fateful night is recorded in Daniel 5, the story of Belshazzar's feast, where out of the sleeve of darkness came a bloodless hand and kind of wrote on the wall the words, Mene, Mene, Tekel Upharsin, meaning that the kingdom has been overthrown and given to the Medes and the Persians. That night, we're told in the last verse of Daniel 5, the king Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, was slain on his throne. And so the Persian army took Babylon without a battle, as Cyrus recorded in that famous Cyrus cylinder. Isaiah 44 says of Cyrus, "He is my shepherd, and he will perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you will be built, and to the temple, your foundation will be laid." Not only did Isaiah predict the overthrow and the destruction of the Jewish temple, but its restoration. And he predicted the name of the man who would deliver them from the hands of Babylon by name, Cyrus, the Persian. And this was 140 years before Cyrus was even born. And when Cyrus conquered Babylon, he allowed the captive Jews to return to their homeland and to rebuild their temple. Now, Josephus, the Jewish historian, wrote about a proclamation that was made by King Cyrus, and he recorded it in his Antiquities of the Jews. This is what he says. "Thus says Cyrus the king, since Almighty God has appointed me to be king of the habitable earth, I believe he is that God which the nation of the Israelites worship." Well, why would he say such a thing like that? "For indeed he foretold my name by the prophets, that I should build him a house in Jerusalem, in the country of Judea. And it was the prophet Isaiah who foretold that 140 years before Cyrus came on the scene. This was known to Cyrus by his reading the book which Isaiah left behind him of his prophecies. And this was foretold by Isaiah 140 years before the temple was demolished. Tremendous predictions of Isaiah. You can read it at home. Open your Bible and read the last verses of Isaiah 44 and into Isaiah 45 about the prediction of Cyrus and what he would do. Now, what metal was used to represent now the third kingdom? So we have the Babylonian kingdom, the head of gold, and we have the Medo-Persian Empire represented by the chest and arms of silver. Now we have a third kingdom represented by a third metal, and it's a kingdom of bronze. And of course, if anyone knows their history as to the power that overcame and conquered the Persian Empire, well, that was the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. And it was in the Battle of Arbela in 331 BC that the Persians were defeated by Alexander. Even movies have been made about this, so we should be familiar with a bit of this history, that the Greeks conquered the Persians in the 4th century BC. Darius, the Persian, he had a vast army, 1 million men in his army. I tell you what, the supply chain to supply 1 million men would have to have been quite incredible. Alexander, of course, he crossed the Dardanelles into Asia or into Turkey and then to fight the Persians. He only had 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. But he was a brilliant strategist in war, and he was able to organise his troops, and he attacked the heart of the Persian army, and Darius had to flee for his life. Later, his own men killed him, killed their king, and Alexander marched and he conquered Persia and became the new ruler of a vast empire, Alexander. Now, the Jewish historian Josephus also documented how Alexander the Great knew his destiny as a result of being shown the prophecies of Daniel. So it's a bit similar to Cyrus. Cyrus was shown the prophecies of Isaiah, written 140 years prior. Now Alexander is shown the prophecies of Daniel, which were written 250 years prior to Alexander being born. And so it says in Josephus, when the book of Daniel was showed him, or showed Alexander, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that himself was the person intended, and he was then glad, and so he dismissed the multitude for the present. Alexander was going to destroy Jerusalem. But when he saw the power of the God of heaven predicting him as the ruler that would come and destroy the Persians, he was most impressed. Now, if you want to know where this was predicted in the book of Daniel, just read Daniel, the 8th chapter, and the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians and the Greeks are mentioned there by name. Now, here's a famous painting. It's in the museum in Madrid in Spain, and it shows Alexander the Great entering the Jerusalem temple. And there the high priest is basically telling Alexander that, hey, we knew you were coming. Our God knew about your coming 250 years before through the prophet Daniel. And so we see the high priest, he's pointing, you can see, to the Ark of the Covenant, which is a representation of the throne of God, basically saying God knew you were coming and has written it down in our prophets. And there we have some other priests, and they're opening to the prophet Daniel and showing Alexander where it was foretold that the Greeks would conquer the Persians. A famous painting in Madrid. Daniel was written, of course, in the 6th century BC, more than 200 years before Alexander, and yet we have this astounding prediction that it would be a Greek that would conquer the Persians. And so we began the Greek Bronze Age. You know, they had breastplates of bronze, they had bronze shields, bronze swords, bronze statues, bronze money, bronze helmets. It was a bronze kingdom, the Greek Empire. The Empire of Greece, it lasted from the 4th century, 331, and it was overthrown by a new kingdom in 168 BC. So let's go to the 4th kingdom in Daniel's prophecy. The 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron. The Iron Kingdom represents the fourth kingdom. And it was the iron monarchy of Rome that conquered the last remnants of the Greek Empire in 168 BC. And so the historian says on June 22, 168 BC, at the Battle of Pydna, perished the empire of Alexander the Great 144 years after his death. And again, as the historian has written, so the prophet has predicted. And every detail has come true to the very letter, as we've traced down from the head of gold, the Babylonians, the chest and arms of silver, the Persians, and now the bronze of the Greeks. Now we come to the iron legs representing the great and mighty Roman Empire. So now the Roman Caesars ruled the world, all over the Middle East. They had a vast kingdom. I visited the Roman Forum, where Caesars would come in pomp and majesty, parading their spoils of war back into the capital of Rome. But today when you go to Rome, you can see the ruins of an empire that once ruled the world. You can see there the Arch of Titus. And inside the Arch of Titus, this was to celebrate his victory over Judea in AD 70 when he conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. And inside you have the arch, you have Titus with his 4-horse chariot coming into Jerusalem. On the other side of the arch, you have the Romans taking away the golden vessels out of the temple of Jerusalem that was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. You can see the 7-branched menorah there, or the candlestick that was once in the temple. In Rome, of course, you can visit the Colosseum. 50,000 people could get in there and enjoy the games and the gladiatorial bouts that took place inside the Colosseum in Rome. They could actually flood the arena and have like mini naval battles in there. But I want you to notice what Edward Gibbon, who wrote the famous Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, said about the overthrow of Rome. He said, the images of gold or silver or brass that might serve to represent the nations and their kings were successively broken by the iron monarchy of Rome. Edward Gibbon was no Christian, but he uses the very metals to symbolise the flow of nations down to the iron monarchy of Rome, the same metals as used in Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, Rome ruled from the 2nd century BC, 168 BC, down to the beginning of the Middle Ages, 476 AD, when the last Roman emperor was deposed in Rome. Hippolytus lived in Rome at the end of the 2nd century. He was a Christian bishop. And this is what he said. He wrote a commentary on the book of Daniel. He said, "Rejoice, blessed Daniel, you have not been in error. All these things have come to pass. Already the iron rules, already it subdues and breaks in pieces." So Hippolytus, living in the 2nd century, as most Christians, or all Christians knew then, they knew they were living in the iron legs of Rome. The iron legs of the vision of Daniel, they knew that represented the Roman Empire. We also should understand where we live in the prophetic timeline given in God's word. How is the breakup of Rome into modern Europe described in this prophecy? As Daniel continues, he talks about the feet of iron and clay. Whereas you saw the feet of toes and partly of potter's clay, partly of iron, the kingdom shall be, notice the word, the kingdom shall be divided. So the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly weak, as iron and clay is both strong and weak. But the important point is that no fifth world empire would come and take over from the Roman Empire. No. Prophecy said the kingdom would disintegrate from within and become divided. And so it is to this day. Barbarian tribes in the 4th and 5th century began to attack portions of the Roman Empire and rebel against the authority of Rome. And they carved up the Roman Empire into what has become the modern states of Europe today. You had the Vandals down there in North Africa. The Visigoths became Spain. The Suevi, Portugal. The Burgundies became Switzerland. The Heruli, they were extinguished, as were the Ostrogoths. The Lombards ended up down in Italy, and the ancient name for Italy is Lombardy. The Alemanni became the Germans. The Franks, well, that's easy. They were the French. And the Anglo-Saxons, we know, they were over there in England. So this is the breakup of the Roman Empire in these centuries just before the Middle Ages. Exactly as the prophet said, it would become a divided kingdom. Some of those countries are strong today, some are weak. We would say that England and France and Germany would be some of the strength of the iron still there, and Switzerland, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and some of the others would be kind of weak. Partly strong and partly weak. And so it is in Europe today. Partly strong, partly weak, and also divided, exactly as the prophet said. So the nations of Europe today, they have actually descended from the division of the Roman Empire, the breakup of the Roman Empire in these early centuries just before the Middle Ages. And it remains a divided kingdom even today. And you know, down through the Middle Ages, many kings have tried to unite the Roman Empire under one kingdom again and unite Europe again. Charlemagne tried to do it, the Frankish king. Charles V in the 15th century tried to unite Europe and put Europe into a bloodbath. Louis XIV tried to do it. Napoleon, famous Napoleon from Paris, the French, they tried to unite Europe and make Paris the capital of a united empire. Kaiser Wilhelm in the First World War tried to unite Europe under a German empire. And then, of course, we all know of Hitler, who tried to set up a 1,000-year Reich and unite Europe again under German rule. Each one came, each one failed. Exactly as the prophet said, the kingdom would remain divided. And you don't even have to be a believer to accept it, because a fact is a fact. The prophet said, and this is from Daniel, who was an exiled prisoner of war in Babylon, who lived in relationship to his God and interpreted the dream right down to our day, where the kingdoms of the former Roman Empire would remain divided, and so they are today. Napoleon said there'll be no repose in Europe until it's under one head. In 5 years, I shall be master of the world, he said. And he marched 500,000 men into Russia to conquer Russia. And over there in Russia, there was the Tsar worried about this vast army coming against him. And they asked the Tsar how he's going to defeat Napoleon. And Napoleon said, the Tsar said, well, I depend on two generals, General January and General February. Because in Russia, in January and February, it's in the peak of winter. And he felt that that would help him overthrow Napoleon's army. And so it did. Napoleon marched 500,000 men into Russia, and he was defeated by the Russian winter, a bit similar to Adolf Hitler as well in his Russian campaign. Defeated by the Russian winter. In fact, Napoleon only carried 14,000 men back to Paris. As a result of that terrible defeat, he lost many, many men over there in Russia. And so the historian wrote, the deliverance of Europe from the dominion of Napoleon was offered neither by Russia nor by Germany, nor by England, but by the hand of God. And it was just a very small thing that defeated Napoleon, a little snowflake. Indeed. Oh, well, Napoleon gathered a few men together, and he was going to go on another campaign, and so he went out to fight the Duke of Wellington from England at the Battle of Waterloo. And as we all know in history, the Battle of Waterloo became Napoleon's Waterloo. He was defeated finally at last. And so prophecy has been fulfilled in every detail. The head of gold, representing the Babylonian kingdom, was followed by the chest and arms of silver, the Medo-Persian Empire. And then the Medo-Persian Empire was followed by the bronze, belly and thighs of bronze, of the Greek kingdom. And then the Greek kingdom was followed by the legs of iron, the iron monarchy of Rome, exactly as the prophet revealed. And again, exactly as the prophet revealed, the iron monarchy of Rome was divided into what has become today the modern states of Europe, and they're still divided, aren't they? Would the European kingdoms ever seek to unite, and how successful would they be? Daniel 2 says in verse 43, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. Mingling with the seed of men means trying to get together through intermarriage. Many kings and queens would try to marry off their sons and daughters to other kingdoms in order to form alliances. Now, when I was over in England, I visited the Queen Victoria Monument. And this is where people are gathered here because they're watching the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. But I was interested in the monument itself of Queen Victoria. Because did you know that Queen Victoria, her grandchildren, and King Christian IX of Denmark, his grandchildren, had married with the grandchildren of Queen Victoria, and all the crowned heads of Europe were related at the time. And so World War I, really we could say, was a great big family squabble of the grandchildren of King Christian IX of Denmark and the grandchildren of Queen Victoria. They tried to unite by mingling with the seed of men or through intermarriage to form alliances. And of course, the prophet said that would happen, and it would also fail. And so it did fail. World War I failed terribly. Kaiser Wilhelm, from World War I, he said, "From childhood I've been under the influence of 5 men. Alexander, Julius Caesar, Theodoric II, Frederick the Great, and Napoleon. Each of these dreamed a dream of world empire, and they failed. But I am dreaming a dream of German world empire, and my mailed fist will succeed." Well, this is the Metz Cathedral in France. In World War I times, under the Kaiser, it was in Germany. The borders have changed. But the Metz Cathedral needed a new roof. One of the distinguishing features of the Metz Cathedral is that the porticos, or the doors into the cathedral, are decorated by statues of Old Testament prophets. In 1898, the cathedral needed a new lead roof, and so this is going to be a very expensive thing, so they made requests to the Kaiser for money to replace the roof. Well, they were also adding this new west portal, and the Kaiser said, "Okay, I'll give you the money for the roof, but here's the condition. I want to be depicted as one of the prophets on the west portal there." Well, the parishioners thought, well, that's a bit of a strange request. Who do you want to be? And the Kaiser said, "I will be the prophet Daniel, because I'm going to prove his prophecy wrong." This is the prophet Daniel at the west portal of the Metz Cathedral. There it is there. And you can see the statue of Daniel. That's as it stands today. This is the contract inside the church for the new lead roof signed by the Kaiser. And of course, we know the Kaiser failed to unite Europe under Germany. He was exiled to Dorn in Holland, and there he died. Now, as a statue that's out the front, his mausoleum is behind the house there, but the statue shows a distinguishing facial feature of the Kaiser. It's his moustache. He has a great big moustache. And there. Well, here you have him now as Daniel the prophet. This, on the left, is a postcard I received from Germany showing, it's a photograph of the Kaiser being depicted as Daniel the prophet. And you can see his big moustache. On the right is the statue as it appears today. Now, I don't know what they did to get rid of his moustache, but Daniel has been restored to his former self. Kaiser failed in Europe. He did not overthrow the prophecy of Daniel in uniting Europe under a German empire. One person at the end of the war put this little sign over the Kaiser's depiction of himself as Daniel the prophet. It's in Latin, and it simply says this: "Thus passes the glory of the world." He thought he'd be the glory of the world. He would unite Europe under one German head, and of course, he failed. And again, this is a book that shows the Kaiser being depicted as Daniel the prophet, and my postcard there, the Kaiser as Daniel the prophet. But after the war, Daniel was restored to his former self. The Kaiser, of course, failed to unite Europe under a German empire. But what the Kaiser failed to do, Adolf Hitler was determined to do. With an army of 5 million, Hitler promised to do what the Kaiser couldn't. He promised to unite Europe and build an empire that would last for 1,000 years. And he marched his stormtroopers across Europe. And he promised he would set up an 1,000-year German Reich, a 1,000-year German rule in Europe. Over there and across the English Channel, Winston Churchill came to office, and he said, "I offer nothing but blood, sweat and tears. We'll fight them on the beaches. We'll fight them in the streets. We'll fight them in the air and so forth. And he encouraged his people for the Battle of Britain. Over in New York, America looking on, the fight over in Europe. Someone wrote in a journal, in a newspaper in New York, in the New York Times, never before had a plan for world conquest been worked out with such scientific precision, nor was one ever before carried out with such savage ruthlessness. Never before had it covered quite so much territory, and one shudders to realise in retrospect, never before had one come quite so close to success. And yet it failed. And he asked the question, why did it fail? Well, I'll tell you why it failed. It failed because a Jewish prisoner of war, under inspiration from his God, interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream and said the kingdom shall be divided. And those few words, those 5 words, have stood in the way of every world conqueror who's tried to reunite the former Roman Empire or Western Europe. It has always been divided, and it remains divided to this day. They would not adhere one to another. And so history has proved prophecy true yet again. During the war years, this young evangelist by the name of George Burnside preached across Australia and New Zealand and across the South Pacific, and he advertised his meetings, Hitler's hopes doomed. One Bible phrase of 5 words wrecked the dream of Napoleon, drove the Kaiser into exile, and these 5 prophetic words will meet Hitler and Goering, and they shall not pass. And I tell you what, thousands came out to listen to George Burnside when he was preaching on that subject. What did he open on? Daniel chapter 2, and give people hope that Hitler will not rule the Northern Hemisphere, that he will come down. The kingdoms will not be united. He had the boldness to say, on the basis of Bible prophecy, that Europe would not be united under a 1,000-year German Reich. And of course, we know that history has proved that true. But, even since World War II, there's been efforts to unite Europe. Back in 1992, the front cover of Time magazine was this: 1992, will Europe unite? Here is the Strasbourg European Community Building. They built it, making it look like the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is where God divided people through many languages. Their motto was, Europe, many tongues but one voice. They wanted to combine together that, I guess, which God had promised would never be united again. Treaties for EC, the European Community Political Union, expected soon, said one newspaper article that I collected back in the 80s. Towards a United States of Europe, was the newspaper reports. Leaders take a huge step towards a united Europe. And of course, I knew that would fail. Why did I know it would fail? Well, I'm not no one special. I don't know the future, but God has revealed it in His Word, that Europe would never be united again under one head. And so I waited, and so the newspapers began sharing these kinds of lines now. Europe losing its way in the search for union, cracks widen in European unity. One Time magazine had the various kingdoms of Europe trying to agree on a treaty. And you can see some are saying yes, some say no, and they can't agree because they're divided. Here are the Maastricht Treaty, and again they couldn't agree on that. But in the aftermath of trying to get that treaty through for Europe, in 1993 the European Union was formed, following the signing of the modified Maastricht Treaty. And you know the European Union, we are told in 2016, in the lead up to the great Brexit vote in Britain, that the EU was designed to be a United States of Europe. They wanted to unite Europe again, like the United States of America. The United States of Europe, said this magazine, Europe's top bureaucrats intensify calls for a European super-state. We want a United States of Europe, says a top EU official back in January of 2014. And again, you can see that they want the European Union to become a United States of Europe. That was the agenda. And as that led up to Brexit, it was leaked out that a federal Europe plot that EU has been drawing up plans for United States of Europe behind Britain's back. And this caused some problems for people. And so we came to Brexit in 2016, didn't we? June 23, Britain cast their vote. And in shock and horror to a lot of people, they chose to leave the European Union. And they're still struggling to leave, but they chose to get out of it. And then it spread across Europe. Italy, France and Holland and Denmark, they all wanted their own referendums whether they should remain in the European Union. Notice the headlines. Brexit vote divides Europe's leaders. Divisions are opening among Europe's leaders. Europe divided, says this headline. Post-Brexit Europe divided. Shock and champagne. Meet the divided committee to save Europe. The article said that the EU was hopelessly divided and dysfunctional. Hopelessly divided and dysfunctional. Divided European leaders are scrambling to save the EU. Germany, France and Italy divided. Europe divided. EU at war with itself. They can't agree. And headline after headline, the EU is divided. EU divided. EU divided. And on. Europe divided. Massive rift. Europe remains as divided as ever. Almost impossible to solve migration crisis. EU deeply divided. Why? Why? I'll tell you why. Because a Jewish prisoner of war in Babylon said, under inspiration from his God, the kingdom will be divided. It will be a divided kingdom. No one will you be able to unite Europe together again. And you don't even have to be a believer to accept it, because a fact is a fact. I like the cartoons, don't you, about the divided Europe with Brexit. Look at all these on the bottom right. They're all punching each other and so forth. They can't agree, the European leaders. They want a Grexit, a Spexit, a Portugexit. The raft coming apart. This was the one I really liked the most. The EU Titanic, and Britain is diving overboard before it all goes down. You know, Europe is really history's Humpty Dumpty, because all the king's horses and all the king's men have failed to put Europe together again. It's the Humpty Dumpty of our modern times. God said it would remain divided, and so history has fulfilled it. Who will set up this final kingdom? Not man. The Bible says, in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And it also says that the rock was Christ. They saw a rock without hands, and it's Christ's kingdom, in other words, that's going to come. No human kingdom is going to rule the world and control the world. Jesus himself is. He's going to come back and set up an eternal kingdom. The Bible predicts that it will be Jesus who will set up his kingdom. It will not be China, the United States, or Israel. There'll be a fifth world empire, yes there will, but it will be an empire ruled by the King of Kings, which will last forever. And it's a kingdom and an empire that Jesus wants you to be part of. What will happen to the earthly kingdoms when God sets up his kingdom? Well, it will break in pieces and destroy all these kingdoms. All earthly kingdoms, as we know it, will come to an end. And God will set up his eternal kingdom. The stone that strikes the statue at its feet, this indicates that Jesus will come during a time of the divided nations. We're living in that time today, the divided nations of Europe. We are living at the time of the toes even, right down in the toenails of time before Jesus comes again. Hippolytus knew when he lived in the legs of iron Rome. Do you know where we live today? We live in the toenails of time, in the divided nations of Europe. Jesus is soon to come. That's the next great power that will rule the world. And I want to be part of that kingdom, and I'm sure you do too. You know, friends, no person, living or dead, has ever revealed the future as powerfully and accurately as we have seen here from the prophet Daniel in our seminar today. Just as surely as Babylon was followed by Medo-Persia, just as surely as Greece followed Medo-Persia, and then Rome followed Greece, and then just as surely as Rome was divided into those kingdoms which are still divided today, just so surely will the next great kingdom come to pass, which is the eternal kingdom of Christ. I want to be part of that, don't you? I'm sure you do too. We can be part of that kingdom. And as we contemplate our desire and our decision to be part of that kingdom, let me read you a little poem. First, the Babylonian kingdom ruled the world. Next, Medo-Persia's banners were unfurled. Then after Greece held universal sway, Rome seized the scepter. Where are we today? Down in the toes made of iron and the clay, weak and divided, soon to pass away. What will the next great, glorious drama be? Christ and his coming and eternity. That's what's coming next. Jesus, to set up his eternal kingdom. What did Nebuchadnezzar say about Daniel's God when he was revealed all this tremendous information? Truly, he said, your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets. He was convicted and impressed by the power of Daniel's God. And friends, I hope you are convicted and you are impacted and impressed by the power of the God of the Bible. He knows the future. He's revealed it to give us faith that he's the one who holds the future in his hands. And if he does, why not put your future into the hands of him who holds the future in his hands? 3 points to remember as we close off this lesson. God has ultimate control over the world. Secondly, we are living in the last days of Earth's history. That is a fact, according to Daniel's prophecy. And God's new kingdom, it will last forever. It'll be a kingdom wherein dwells righteousness forevermore. Well, I want to be ready, don't you? I want to be ready for that everlasting kingdom. We are down in the toenails of time. Jesus, the rock, is soon to come. Do you want to be ready? Do you want him to help you get ready? And if you do, I want to encourage you to keep coming along week by week and watching and being part of our Secrets of Prophecy seminar, because you will learn how you can be ready for the coming of the King of Kings when he sets up his everlasting kingdom. I wonder if you would respond to our final question. After seeing the way God understands the future and has ultimate control over the events of this planet, are you willing for him to lead in the future of your life? Will you yield your life into his hands and ask him to lead you into the future? I hope you can say yes, because for me and my house, it's a big answer of yes. We will serve the Lord. We want to be ready for that eternal kingdom. Let's pray as we close this session. Our Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for the power of the Bible. We want to thank you for the evidence of not only prophecy, but the incredible fulfillment of prophecy in Daniel, the 2nd chapter. How simple it is to understand. Babylon and Persia and Greece and Rome, the divided nations of Europe, and then the coming of Jesus. Oh, Lord, help us to be ready for that day. Help us to want to be ready for that day. And bless everyone who is watching, wherever and whenever they're watching, that they may make their decision sure to yield their life into the hands of him who holds the future in his hands. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, our next session, don't miss it. It's called The Signs of the Times. How close are we to the coming of the King of Kings? That's our next session. Look forward to see you then. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our Secrets of Prophecy seminar this afternoon. And, you can actually download the lesson outline by following the details on your screen. Now, perhaps you have a question. And we'd like to have a go at answering your questions. So if you have a question or a comment, you'd like some further information, or you'd just like to get the lesson outline, all the details are on your screen. I'm going to look forward to seeing you again next week as we investigate another exciting topic in our Secrets of Prophecy seminar. See you then.
Looking back, I can see all those happy memories didn't happen by chance. I wish I knew then what I know now. I should have asked more questions, got more advice. I didn't realize how much you sacrificed. Now I'm a parent. I see everything you did for me. Thank you.